We're going to be a little short on time. I knew we'd be short on time no matter if we just started lickety split right off the bat. So let me kind of tell you what my idea of the purpose of this is and what it is not. The purpose of this is to give you some quick pointers on how to take the ACT, the math portion of the ACT obviously, to get the best score that you can based on the mathematical knowledge that you already have. Is it clear to everybody that there is not even remotely the potential for me to teach you a bunch of math today? Yeah, that's not what can happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about strategies, and I'm going to give you a couple of alternative strategies. I'm going to give you, we've been teaching the Cambridge ACT Prep for quite some time here. And so I'm going to give you their take on the strategy, and then I have kind of discovered over time some strategies that students have found that have been very effective that are a little bit of a tweak of what they suggest. So it is something that you can kind of consider both things. I'll give you a little bit of practice today. I'm sure in your math courses you probably had some additional practice. The other thing that I can suggest to you, because it's not already been suggested to you, go to ACT.org, and there are practice tests that are available at ACT.org, even without registering or doing anything along those lines. Okay? What I wanted to put up here is, I understand that kind of our purposes here are a little bit different than typically when I teach the ACT class. I'm working with students who are just going to go take it on a Saturday, and they're just trying to get the best score that they can for college and all that kind of thing. You know, this is kind of a dual purpose. We're trying to get good scores for the school. We're trying to have you get good scores that could possibly help you get into a college or get more scholarship money or whatever. What I have up here, now this is a year or two old, so you know, might have changed over the last year. These are typical scores for students attending different colleges. This isn't every college that any of you will be considering, but just give you a rough idea where you need to be. Generally speaking, for those schools where I could get it, what this is showing is the middle 50%. For those of you in statistics, the interquartile rate of scores. So, for example, at Truman, the typical kid comes in having scored between a 24 and a 29. At Mizzou, the middle 50% is between a 23 and a 28. Now, for those of you that are considering Mizzou, you might find that interesting because they advertise what score is being the minimal score to get in there. Anybody know? 24. 24. Maybe, unless it's changed to 25 in the last year, but what I've always known it to be is a 24. What this tells you is that some of these schools, Mizzou included, have other ways where you can get in even if you get a lower ACT score than what they advertise as being that minimum score. And it's usually done on the sliding scale, excuse me, with class rank and GPA. And it's an acknowledgement that not all of us are, you know, the best test takers in the entire world. Some of you are great. I happen to be a good, probably my test scores are better than really what would be reflective of what I always know. Some people are great at taking tests and some people are not. So anyway, that gives you some idea there. Okay, so now what is on the ACT test? There's 60 questions. You have 1 hour to do it, 60 minutes. Now, we'll talk about pacing and stuff here in a minute. That's going to be a big part of what we talk about today. But before we do that, let's talk about what makes up the ACT test. These percentages here are what ACT, the College Board, strives to put on every single test. So this isn't just like, hey, one test looked like this. This is what they attempt to do every single time. Now, if you do 7% of 60, you don't get exactly 4. You know, it doesn't come out to be a full number. But so what you have over there is the approximate percentage of questions that are in each category, and then what percent that is. Okay, so look at the top 3 ones that are up there. You have pre-algebra, elementary algebra, intermediate algebra. Intermediate you might think of as being like Algebra 2. So the algebra stuff comprises about, 33 of the questions? So a little over half is just algebra. Okay, another 23 questions are geometry. Now when it talks about coordinate geometry, we're talking midpoint, distance formula, things like that. And then for plane geometry, it's like maybe finding an interior angle of a polygon or something like that. Trig, like I tell people in my ACT class, I routinely have people come in and say, hey, if I could just get the trig part, man, I'd ace this thing. And maybe it's true. Maybe they only missed 4 questions and they were all trig, but I doubt it. The truth of the matter is like if you think, hey, the reason I'm not doing well on the ACT or the reason I'm worried about not doing well is because I haven't learned trig very much through the courses I've had, it's only going to typically be 4 questions. And some of those are just like basic right triangle trig. There's usually one on there that probably if you haven't had pre-calculus or are at the end of Algebra 2, you might not quite know how to do it. It's really not going to make much difference in your score, truthfully, unless you're one of those people that is trying to get, a perfect score or something along those lines. So, how do you get a decent score? Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, oh, there's no way I could ever get a 24, and some of you are thinking, if I got a 24, I'd be deeply disappointed. But what you see down below there is this description of what it would take to get a 24. Okay, you can miss all the trig. Let's just say you don't know how to do anything with trig, and I know you all do know a little bit about trig. I would assume all of you have seen, hey, the sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent over hypotenuse. That's trig. That's what we're talking about there. So I'm sure that all of you would be able to take a stab at that. But if you missed all of those, half the coordinate geometry, in other words, midpoint, distance formula, stuff like that, half of those, half the intermediate algebra questions, so that's the algebra 2 type stuff, plus an additional 9, that would give you typically a 24 on the ACT. What that means is you are prepared through the math courses that you've taken. There's no possibility that the reason that you won't do well on the ACT is because you haven't had enough math. You've had it. You've been exposed to it. What the problem often is how many of you have taken an ACT before, or an ACT practice or anything like that? Okay, so you've all seen the types of questions. Are they just like the ones you typically see in a math class? No, they're different. And so one of the best things that you can do, honestly, to get ready for it is to practice as much as you can. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of practice today. I've got, I think, a little thing with about 30 questions on it, so you get the opportunity to do that. But if you really want to help yourself out, just take some of those practice tests that are easily available. Okay, so this is where I'm going to start talking about kind of the 2 different ideas on how to pace yourself. First of all, the questions on the ACT get progressively more difficult. They start off easy and they get harder as the test goes on. That doesn't mean necessarily that when you go from, say, number 5 to number 6, you'll think 6 was harder than 5. Just generally speaking, the questions do get more difficult as you go on. So this is the Cambridge ACT prep version of what you, kind of the way you should pace yourself on the test. They say that the idea here is that when you start off on the first questions, you should go faster than 1 question every minute because they're easier. And then as you go on, that will allow you more time for the harder questions. You get the basic idea? It is certainly not to try to memorize this chart and say, hey, I've got 36 seconds per question on 1 through 10. That won't work. And so on down the chart. The idea there from that chart is just the basic idea that you need, if you're going to utilize this method, I'm going to offer you another one here in a minute. If you utilize this method, basically you just need to keep in mind you need to be working more quickly at the beginning than you do at the end. Having said that, it is not a good idea to go so fast at the beginning that you miss easy ones that you should be getting. The truth of the matter is the first probably 10 questions, for sure, all of you should be getting the vast majority of those. Those are all going to be typically pretty easy ones. Okay, and if you don't get it, it might just be tricky wording in the question or something like that. It will not be because it's complex math. Okay, so I'm going to give the alternative version first of the pacing. Okay, this is the way I think works the best, this first bullet point up there. And let me elaborate on this for you. Here's the idea. You're going to think to yourself, I'm going to get through this test in 45 minutes. But you're not going to answer every question in these 45 minutes. In your brain, you're going to categorize the questions into 3 categories. Category 1 is the ones that, you know how it is in math, you see a question, oh, I know how to do that, I just need to do it, and then put down the answer. There's those types of questions. Category 2 is ones where you look at it and you think, I think if I take some more time with that, I can get that question, but I'm going to need to take some more time. I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but I'm pretty sure I can. That's category 2. Okay, what you're going to do on those is on your answer sheet, not in the booklet, on your answer sheet, you're going to circle those numbers, and those are going to be ones that's telling you, hey, I'm coming back to these, okay? In those 15 minutes are going to be left at the end. So you'll have those circled on your answer sheet. The reason I say not in your test booklet, you're allowed to write anything you want in your test booklet. It's because if that's where you've circled them, it's going to take you a lot longer to find them. You know what I'm saying? So if you just circle them, if you just circle the number over there to the left of the bubbles, then that's the place to go to find the ones that you need to go back over, or that you want to go back over. Now, the ones that you look at and you say, you know what? I've got no freaking idea how to do this. Just bubble in an answer and move on. You know what? And if you know you don't know how to do it, don't bubble in ones that don't just guess on ones that you do know how to do. Okay, obviously, you know what? I don't need to say that to you guys, because if you guys didn't care, you wouldn't be here. If I was talking to the whole student body who's going to take this, there are students, I am certain, who will walk in there and say, I don't care, I'm not going to college, I don't care whether the school has good scores or not. You know, and so those students need some motivation to, you know, bear down and really try on all 60 questions. But there are going to be some, more than likely, I know there's a few people in here who will have a fighting chance on all 60 questions. But for most of us, there's going to be some where you will look at it and you're just going to think, I have no idea, right? Your best thing to do on those is just to fill in a bubble and move on and not worry about it, okay? Then you're going to have 15 minutes at the end. So your goal is to get through as many of them as you can answer in the first 45 minutes. Then you have those 15 minutes to go back through on those ones that you've circled and come back and devote your time to those ones that you need more time with. Now, obviously, you know, with 60 questions, you can't have 30 questions circled. That's not going to work. So that's where the whole idea, when I say you need to practice, that's where that comes in. I mean, that's how you're going to know how that's going to work out for you. You know, I would say somewhere 5 to 10 at the most should be how many you have circled at that stage. Because in 15 minutes, you know, if you had 10 circled, that gives you a minute and a half, right, per question. And so you're definitely not going to have more time than that. And then finally, on answering questions, for heaven's sake, absolutely under no circumstances do you leave a question blank. There is no reason to leave a question blank. All right, just a couple other things. When you're looking at multiple choice answers, there's a variety of different test-taking strategies, obviously. One of them is working backwards. For example, ACT is usually a little more smart than this, but occasionally you'll see questions like this. Sometimes you'll have a question that says solve an equation that's very difficult, and then you have answer choices. Well, one of those is the answer. And they're not going to have two right answers, right? So if it's a very difficult, let's say for example it's an absolute value equation. Now absolute value equations have two answers, right? I mean, I don't know if you know that or not, but if you have the absolute value of x equals 2, x can be 2, it could be negative 2. But if you've forgotten how to solve an absolute value equation, I'll bet you at least know how to plug a number into an absolute value equation, right? And so you can use the answers to work backwards and figure out, which one of those answer choices could be the right one. One other thing I'll say about working backwards. The answers, when they're numeric answers as opposed to variables or something like that, they're always arranged in either ascending or descending order. All right? So, there's a trick that you can use that will typically cut your time in half for working backwards on problems. What is it? If they're arranged in order.
Don't use the extremes.
Right. Start in the middle. Start in the middle, plug in the middle number. If it's too big, now remember, there's 5 answer choices per question. If you plug in that middle number and it's too big, then there's only 2 more that you're going to have to try, right? The 2 smaller ones. If it's too large, there's only 2 more that you're going to have to try, the ones that are above that. So, if you're working backwards on one, that can, conceivably cut the amount of time that it would take for that question in half. All right, there is no value in reading the directions. Do not read the directions. There's nothing in, I'm going to tell you a couple of things about the directions that are, there's only one thing in the directions that's even worth paying attention to, and it happens to be untrue. So I'll tell you about that in a second. We've already talked about the next thing there. All right, actually the second to the last bullet point has to do with the directions. It says use pictures, remember, they are drawn to scale. In the directions, it says, do not assume the pictures are drawn to scale. Every single one of these ACT tests that I look at and I work through, every single one of them, there are multiple questions that you can just look at and use the diagram to figure out which one's the right answer, just by the scale of the drawing. For example, if you're asked to calculate the measure of an angle, and let's say it looks like it's about 50 degrees, okay? So if that's the only one that's an acute angle, all the rest of them are obtuse angles, I'm not going to, if there's a calculation involved, I'm not going to bother because I know which one's the right answer. That is the absolute truth. I've never seen what I've just told you violated, where they drew a picture out of scale just to fool you. You can assume that it is drawn to scale, okay? And then finally, watch for thought reversers. We're practicing right now for AP exams in my statistics classes, and I missed one just the other day because I answered the opposite of what they were asking for. It was a question that's, well, it wasn't exactly a thought reverser. It said, how many questions must you eliminate before you should guess? There was 5 answer choices, and you should eliminate 2 before you should guess. I'm not going to try to explain what the question had in it. But instead of saying you should eliminate 2, so that you were down to 3, instead of circling 2, which is the right answer, I circled 3. You guess as soon as you got it down to 3. Those kinds of little details, it's really easy to mess up on. So just make sure you read the question carefully and answer the question that they're really asking. Okay, I want to talk about calculators here. I think some of you who are in courses where you use graphing calculators a little bit, they may be offered to you to use on the ACT. I want to caution you about that. First of all, use a calculator when it's necessary. If it's not necessary, if it's something that you can just look at, then obviously just working it out in your head will save you time. You can pretty much guarantee that if it's an easy question that you can answer in your head and you find that answer that you came up with in your head, it's on there, you got it right. So don't use it when you don't need to. Skip that. Thought I got rid of all those steps. Okay, graphing versus scientific calculators. There's going to be a bullet point here in a minute that's going to say all you really need for the ACT is a 4-function calculator. Something that will add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and do square roots. That will do all the math that you will be required to do where they don't give you the additional information. If you're asked to do a trig problem, let's say you need the sine of 30 or 35 degrees for something. They'll tell you what it is. You will not be expected to have a calculator that will calculate the sine of 35 degrees. If it's a sine of 30 degrees, or 45 degrees, or 60 degrees, or something like that, you might be expected to figure that out on your own, because those are special angles, and I'm trying to discipline myself from launching into teaching about that as I say that, but, you know, yeah. So, yeah, the test provides you with any trig values that are required. In theory, nothing beyond the basic four-function calculator with square root capability is necessary. Okay, so instead of saying which calculators are allowed, let me just really simplify this for you. Does anyone in here own a TI Inspire that they plan to use? If you do, there's a version of it that's okay and there's a version that's not. Does anyone have a Texas Instrument calculator that has a number larger than 84? Okay, so if those are not the case, then you should be okay. That's a 30. My version of the perfect calculator for the ACT is a TI-30, just like the one that you have right there. Not one of the backwards ones like a certain chemistry teacher loves, this one. But if you're used to it, then it's fine. But anyway. Okay, so let me now give my little spiel on if you're offered a graphing calculator. If you are offered a graphing calculator and you are not absolutely rock solid on using it, and you're not used to using it, just use the calculator that you always do use. You're going to be so much better off with that than trying to use a graphing calculator when you're not super familiar with it. There's not a lot of stuff that a graphing calculator is going to do for you that is going to help you on the ACT. You're not going to graph stuff on the ACT. Occasionally there might be a problem, like I say, where if you're super good with them, it might make something a little more easy, you know, a little easier for you, but there's just not much along those lines. Missy, have you taken the ACT before? I mean, do you generally agree with what I'm saying? That, yeah. Like when I have a class on this and we've gone through a practice ACT, like when I go back through it, pretty much all of the students, once they see how to do it, they're like, oh, I should have been able to do that problem. That was, you know, they're all really, the vast majority of them are pretty darn easy. Okay, so when you take the test, like I say, you're going to quickly preview the direction, you're going to quickly preview the test, and let me say something about that real quick. Here's what I mean by that. And this is totally optional for you. What some people suggest, is what Cambridge suggests, is that you take about 15, 20 seconds and just page through it and kind of already have looked at which ones you think, hey, those are ones that I'm not going to know how to do, or these are ones that I'm going to circle, you know, for those last 15 minutes. That's the purpose of previewing. I'm not totally sold on the idea that is a great use of your time. So part of the purpose of this, well, this isn't really a class, I guess, but talk is to have you be familiar with the directions for the ACT. So, like I said before, the directions for the ACT, they're going to say one thing in them that pertain to anything you really need to know, and I want you to disregard it. Believe the opposite. The figures are on the scale. Okay? Occasionally the directions change, but very rarely. They're not going to change before next Tuesday, I guarantee you. Okay? We've talked about this a little bit. Make sure you answer the question that's being asked. It's so typical to look back at one and you're like, I know I knew that answer. Well, you knew the answer. You just didn't answer the question that they were really asking you. I'm guilty of that sometimes. The questions are not ordinary math questions like what you're accustomed to seeing. So read the questions carefully. Make sure you pay attention to the units. Sometimes you can use the units to help you eliminate answers. And sometimes the answer just has to do with that. Pay attention to thought reversers. These are typical things that will cause you to miss one, where it's like, which answer is not correct, all of the following answers are correct, but or except, and circle them in your test booklet when you see them, so you don't be like Alan Mann and screw it up. I will say this, they don't try to trick you with those. They put them in bold letters and capitalize them. They don't hide them in small print. So if you miss it because of that, it's not their fault. Okay, we talked about eliminating answer choices. So if you're unsure on one, and let's say, okay, Remember how I said there's going to be some that you're just going to guess on? Well, there's sort of some middle ground on that, right? Okay, so let's say that it's a geometric problem. The picture's drawn to scale, and let's say it asks you to find one of the interior angles of a polygon. And you don't remember the formula. And they don't give it to you. Well, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, that looks like an obtuse angle to me. No, there's bigger than 90. All right? And there's 2 on there. Well, there's 3 on there that are acute angles. You can eliminate those, right? And then let's say there's 2 obtuse angles, and both of that are close enough together where you just can't, you can't figure out which one it is between those 2, and you don't know the formula. So by eliminating those other 3 answers, instead of you having a 20% chance on that one, now you're up to a 50% chance when you guess. Okay. Now, these are the formulas that absolutely 100% you cannot get by without knowing. The slope-intercept form of the line, the midpoint formula, the slope formula, the distance formula, and the quadratic formula. They're in your packet, you don't need to write them down. Having said that, I also included, it'll be a couple pages further in, a comprehensive list of some other mathematical formulas and facts and so on that you might want to take a look at. I hope it got in there. Yeah, it's actually at the end. So, now, let me go one more slide because I'm thinking about 2 formulas that are not on here that I will add to this. Yeah. Okay. The area and the circumference of a circle, if they ask you to find either of those formulas are not going to be given. So I'm probably insulting some of your intelligence levels by doing this, but I'm going to write it on. Okay, so the area of a circle is pi r squared. See, the problem is you get an algebra 2 or whatever and you haven't seen geometry for a while, or you're in statistics or whatever, and you forget. Okay, so those are those 2 formulas. Why I don't have those on that other slide, I can't tell you. Okay. Just some real basic, you know what? You can look at that on your own. The other thing that I put on here, it's entirely possible that some of you have never seen this before. If you see an equation that looks like this one, this is just one of those things I'm throwing out there for somebody who's maybe never studied conics, not even circles. If you see an equation that looks like that, that's the equation for a circle. So for example, if you saw something like this. I'll make this one plus. If all it asked you was, something about what kind of a geometric figure this equation represented, you should all be able to get it. It's a circle. Now, the other, more likely what they're going to ask you is, what's the center, what's the radius? Okay? The center of this circle would be what? It would be 2, -3. So the center you find by looking at what's in the parentheses, and it's the opposite of the signs in the parentheses. Does that make sense? And what would the radius be? Okay, it's the square root of what's on the right side of the equal sign. So the radius of that would be 4. It's really big up there. It's a lot bigger than when I write on the board. Alright. That's it. That. Okay. So before we do a little bit of practice, probably take us to the end of our time here. How many of you in a math class have gotten, like over the last 2 weeks or whatever, have done some ACT practice? Okay. Yeah, I think what that represents, like if you're in like pre-calculus, no. College algebra, no. Statistics, heck no. Calculus, I don't know if there's any calculus. I don't know if there are calculus. Oh, no, they wouldn't be in here. So, anyway, at the very end is a little section called ACT Math Facts and Formulas. And so, even though there's a lot more on here than what I said you needed, that you had to know for the ACT, I would strongly encourage you to read through this. And anyway, sorry about that. Did anybody else come in after these got around? Okay. I would strongly encourage you to read through these and kind of remind yourself. For example, it talks about arithmetic sequences, geometric sequences. What's an integer? I'm skipping over some things, I'm sure you know. Basic stuff on factoring, solving, averages, fundamental counting principle, all these kinds of things that we don't have time to do while we're here today. All right. So we have a little bit less than 25 minutes until we're done. You're going to, here in a second, start working on 34 problems from an actual ACT test. Now, it's 1 through 34, so they should be easier than 35 through 60. Now, if you were doing it, if you were assuming that you were going to take 1 minute per problem, then you would think you'd need more than 34 minutes. I want you to try to get through all 34 of those questions in the amount of time that we have here. Now, if you want me to grade these, then what you have to do is you have to tear it apart, put your name on it, and give it to me, and I'd be happy to score those for you tomorrow or by Monday for sure next week. Okay? Everybody find that section in your little packet there? Okay, go ahead and start.